Last month, through some investor calls and conversations with outlets such as Eurogamer, Ubisoft higher-ups revealed their plans to expand more into the free-to-play side of gaming, with some of their AAA IPs planned to move into this model in the future, along with some completely new IPs to build around this model. After revealing their third game in the Division franchise, The Division Heartland, as planned to be free-to-play, they went on to say in an investors call, and I quote, "In line with the evolution of our high-quality lineup that is increasingly diverse, we are moving from our prior comment regarding releasing 3 to 4 premium AAAs per year," said Frederick Duggett, Ubisoft CFO. Additionally, we are building our high-end free-to-play games to be trending towards AAA ambitions over the long term. Our intention is to deliver a diverse lineup of games that players will love across all platforms. We are excited to be investing more in free-to-play experiences. However, we want to clarify that this does not mean reducing our AAA offering. With a lot of discussion of this announcement, some positive and some negative, they went on to clarify in a conversation with Eurogamer that our aim is to continue to deliver premium experiences to players such as Far Cry 6, Rainbow Six Quarantine, Riders Republic and Skull and Bones to name a few, while also expanding our free-to-play portfolio and strengthening our brands to reach even more players. When looking at Rainbow Six Siege for comparison, many other FPS games and games in general in recent years, big or small, have gone free to play. Call of Duty Warzone, Valorant and Apex Legends being 3 examples that come to mind, along with Ubisoft's very own game, Hyperscape. When Fortnite Battle Royale released, it helped me to understand that especially with a AAA game, if people are really invested and enjoy your game, along with being given a consistent stream of new content, they're often more willing to spend money on cosmetics and non-pay-to-win items. Developers of successful free-to-play games like the first 3 I mentioned can easily recoup the production costs and go on to make massive profit margins on top of that. So, let's look at from a developer or player's perspective a few pros and cons of changing to the free-to-play model, and then how I think this would affect if Siege was to go free-to-play or not. Starting off with the positive, exposure. And the first means of exposure I'll mention is simply word of mouth. For example, school friends telling one another about cool free-to-play games they are playing, along with more YouTubers and streamers being able to cover the game, bringing more eyes to their product. And as we know, many fans of big streamers and YouTube content creators are often enticed to follow what that creator is playing, even if it is a game they weren't thinking of picking up before. Word gets around quickly in real life and social media, and we've seen games in the last few years, free or not, such as Fall Guys and Among Us, spread like wildfire throughout the friendship groups and the wider gaming community, giving the developer the chance to have the eyes of the world watching. I think some big corporations and their developers underestimate how valuable it is to have your game have 200,000 viewers watching their favorite streamer play it, or millions watching their favorite YouTuber cover it in a video, and this can be much more valuable than any paid advertisement campaign will ever do. And on this, often this growth can stem from trust, as people trust their friends and favorite content creators and can be encouraged to try something just off their positive reaction, much more than a big corporation who have their own financial agendas promoting it in the form of ads or cinematic trailers. So when a game is free, if it gets a good reception, people are willing to download it as they have nothing to lose, and it can spread so quickly just from these 2 mediums alone, and before you know it, your game is the most watched game on Twitch and is trending on YouTube. Often though, the harder part is player retention. We see many games, again Fall Guys being a good example, have a huge boom and have a hot streak of success, but the lack of content updates or content creators not being encouraged enough to keep playing the game, whether it be financially from lack of sponsored content or just the game becoming stale, means it falls off a cliff when it comes to daily player numbers and relevance in the gaming content arena. You go from seeing a game like Fall Guys every 5 videos on your YouTube timeline with hundreds of thousands of viewers on Twitch to barely seeing it in your feed with just a few thousand viewers watching it on Twitch at any one time. And another good point to talk about would be the financial entry point being a lot lower, as people only need the console and online subscription service to play. And on this point, as someone who played console games their entire life and only got my first PC a few months ago, I was super pleased that I could play most the same games I had on console, but without having to pay a monthly online subscription service along with the actual price of the game. And with prices of AAA games that aren't free seeming to go up in the last 2 console generations, this is a massive selling point in my opinion. However, a bad point and one of the main downsides I see, which actually could be good from a player's perspective, I think is the pressure it puts on developers to create a really high quality game. And there are 2 big reasons off the top of my head I can think why. Firstly, as previously mentioned, people will spend on microtransactions, but only if the game is really good and the in-game content they are buying is of a high enough quality. For example, If the game is just good or average, even if people do buy microtransactions, it won't be the vast amount of purchases games like Valorant or Fortnite have seen since release, so the profit margins are unlikely to be enough for it to be deemed a success and worth the risk. And for the second point on pressure, although it's good for players, from a developer's perspective, making a game free means that if the game isn't good enough, people will just bounce over to another game and never touch yours again, as they haven't lost anything except their time, which likely even more discourages them to ever pick the game up again. We've all been in that situation, Cyberpunk, where a game releases and it's a big disappointment, but because we've spent £50+ on it, we feel that we have to play at least a good portion of it to get our money's worth, or at least to feel that we haven't wasted our money completely. And for statistics and investors, as long as they see the purchases and hours played, let's be real, they usually don't care if or why a player is actually playing the game as long as they're playing it. That would be a thing of the past, and these days with the level of details put into things like graphics and huge open world maps, this could lead to some terrible situations for developers where it comes to financially being at a loss or not making big enough profits. Back to something potentially good, however, I think is from a player's perspective, if games do move in this direction, previously mentioned pressure could lead to a lot more quality games, as developers would know that a half-baked game will not encourage people enough to buy in-game content, let alone hang around at all, and the game could completely bomb. Yes, you could flip this and say free-to-play games can be cheaper to develop, but as mentioned, with the level of things like graphic and tech these days, they're still not cheap. If a game like Cyberpunk comes out in the state it did, even if it's free to play and buyable cosmetics are good, I just don't see people buying enough of these cosmetics for it to make the money they need it to. Another good point is that people love playing games with friends. Speaking for myself, and I'm sure many would agree, there are loads of games that I wouldn't put a minute into if it wasn't for the possibility of playing with friends. For many people, battle royales are a big culprit of this. People want to play with their friends instead of running solos all night. And another example of this, although I personally enjoy playing this game alone or with friends, is Dead by Daylight. People love to team up with their mates and just have a fun evening of working together to achieve things. So games being free means in the past, if games such as Fall Guys had been free to play on every platform, people are more willing to sink hours into the game and maybe even buy some cosmetics because their friends are right there alongside with them for the ride. And a good thing on this point is that this might lead to some more games becoming cross-platform. As Fortnite Battle Royale released and exploded in popularity with crazy daily player counts, it made complete sense and there seemed to be pressure from the community to make the game cross-platform. I am 21 myself, but looking back at school times, if your whole school is playing Fortnite, then you want to be able to play with all your friends instead of just some, and avoid fear of missing out. I'm no technician, but if Fortnite and other games could go cross-platform 2 years ago, then I feel like with the natural improvements since then in technology and new generations of consoles being out, that this is something they can achieve and would only not do so because of console wars bullshit. If I'm wrong and you know a good reason why they couldn't, feel free to drop a comment below and tell me why. I'll be down there reading and would be interested to know why. And the final general point I want to make, which is a bad one, is that this could be a big hit for single player games, as adopting this free to play structure for them would likely see way less in-game cosmetic sales compared to multiplayer games, and although it's silly, people like to, myself included, show off their skins to their friends and other players in the lobby, so of course multiplayer games will gain from this. But many incredible cinematic story-driven single-player games that want you to pay an upfront price for an experience similar to going to the cinema could take a hit. These games would be put in an awkward situation of either having to charge people to buy the game and be priced out or frowned upon because of the competition and how many potentially free-to-play games there might be at that time, or make the game free-to-play and not have near enough in-game purchasable content that is worth it for a player even if it's good, who is playing a linear game with not nearly as much replay value that most multiplayer games have. So, with some of the more important points that crossed my mind while making this video discussed, let's look at how a few of these things would affect the likelihood of Siege going free to play in the future. Games like Siege specifically that would go from paid to free that have been out for years and are already a live service might struggle to be able to entice long-lasting players who have already bought most of the in-game content to buy more alpha packs and Siege credits. I think games like this would not only need to bring out loads more cosmetics similar to how much content there is in CSGO, for the majority of players who aren't new players to want to invest more money into the game. And if the skins are not good enough, then it's a big gamble that likely won't pay off. And even then, because of that, I think they would probably have to adopt a model similar to Fortnite and Valorant, where the in-game shop allows you to see exactly what you're buying and either everything is available at once, or if not, then the shop updates on a regular week-to-week basis. When it comes to Siege in particular, Although there is a regular stream of new content, I don't see the current Alpha Pack and Battle Pass system being enticing enough for the player base to collectively buy enough to make the game financially successful to the point where Ubisoft and their investors would want it to be. Secondly, Siege is known as a very punishing game to a new player, and that is a big part of what either eventually leads someone to falling in love with the game and pushing through it, or alternatively being disheartened and never playing it again. I remember speaking to one of my best friends before I was ever even considering getting Siege, and both of us saying how sweaty it was and how it would just be too punishing to get into, thinking that we would need to be gods at the game to keep pace, and that was 3.5 years ago. So think about how that would feel now with all the new content and changes we've had since then, and part of that comes down to the fact that it costs money to play. I think that many game enthusiasts, especially those established in the industry, forget that many people, especially console players, cannot afford to just splash cash on whatever game they feel like, especially if they're not even sure they're going to enjoy it in the first place. Of course, no matter what the price is, free or not, you will have players who try Siege and understandably get overwhelmed and don't feel passionate enough to keep playing. But regardless, every new player that picks up Siege is a chance at adding another person to your regular player base, and on top of that, potentially someone that in time might want to buy cosmetics and support the game. So I just think overall it makes the pre-notion of Siege being very punishing less of a decisive factor on whether someone decides to pick up the game for the first time. If my friend isn't sure about Siege, but I love it, they no longer have to worry about wasting their money to play a game I've suggested, and can instead just try it for free, and if they don't like, no sweat, can uninstall it without a financial hit. Many people are really savvy with their money, and even if a game is £2, they might be more likely to play it if it's free. But to counter my previous point, with how cheap Siege is currently, sitting at about $24.99 on the PS Store and often being on sale for a fraction of that price for the standard edition, along with it being available on things like Game Pass, it seems like it shouldn't be a massive transition financially to go to free to play compared to other full price AAA games. I did mention that I don't see the current Alpha Pack and Battle Pass system being good enough to financially carry Siege if it went free to play, but it's a much smaller margin of money loss from the actual sales of the game compared to a £50 or £60 game. So with some small but important changes, along with the massive boom in player base you will naturally get from free to play games at this moment in time in gaming, I think Siege could easily be able to make up the difference and more in the loss of outright sales of the game. And finally, jumping back into Pressure again, a game like Siege with so many bugs, glitches, hackers and so on would be more easily forgiven, as you know what they say, is free to play. I don't agree with this being an excuse for a game being in a bad state, but it's just the reality of the situation when games or things in general are free. People are much more understanding because none of their own money they put in is being essentially wasted or devalued. What do you guys think? Could Siege become a free-to-play game at some point in the near future? And how do you feel about Ubisoft's recent announcement of heading towards a free-to-play system for their future AAA games? I personally think it really depends on how much effort the developers put into these free-to-play games, and would like to hope that they are not that short-sighted to make low-quality games that are free just because they are easier to produce. Hopefully they would keep their creative integrity. If developers continue to put the same or more effort into games as time moves forward, I'm actually super for these free-to-play games, because growing up from a lower class background, something like this when I was a kid would have been a dream come true for me. If all my favourite games and games I wanted to play were free to me to pick up and play, I can't imagine how I would have felt if any GTA had come out or Assassin's Creed and it was free. I would have been losing my shit with excitement. As for Siege in particular, I would be for this, and I'd like to think that this isn't too far out the realms of possibility considering the current price of the game compared to your regular AAA games, but honestly, what matters most to me is the health of the game. I want Rainbow Six Siege to live as long as possible, and if it means it has to float around the price it is now to stay financially stable, then so be it. Again, let me know what you think in the comments down below, and I'll be reading and responding to what you guys have to say. I haven't done one of these videos in a while, not since my first upload in the channel, so smash the like if you enjoyed, subscribe with the bell turned on if you want to keep up with upcoming videos on the channel, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.